Coma is arguably the best of the 7 films Michael Chrichton directed, and only one of 2 not based on his own original material. Coma, the novel, is a story of a young doctor investigating a startling epidemic of anesthesia-induced coma patients at a prestige hospital, and was written by Robin Cook. Cook, like Crichton, studied medicine at Harvard, but ultimately shifted towards a career in writing fiction. Coma was published in 1977. It's a decent book, but I prefer Crichton's film. In my review of Westworld, I discussed Crichton's complicated relationship with technology, what he might see as a commoditization, a commercialization, or a dehumanizing effect that technology has on the user. In this video, I'm going to be talking about Crichton's relationship to medical and scientific authority, which was latent in a lot of his books and many of his long-form talks. I believe the themes of medical malpractice and high-minded authority from the expert class is what drew Crichton to adapt Cook's novel. That, amongst other things, which we will discuss. Coma is a really fun 70s thriller with a lot of striking visuals and a great cast, and I'm excited to talk about it. Coma follows the inquisitive but serious young doctor Susan Wheeler, played by Geneviève Bujold, who works against the odds to uncover a terrible crime unfolding in the midst of her intense work at a major hospital, fighting back against bureaucracy and pressures from her colleagues to uncover the hideous truth that leads her to a very sci-fi style secret laboratory and potentially to her death. The French-Canadian actress Bujold had recently made her transition to Hollywood after starring in a variety of international co-productions and then winning the Academy Award for the British production of Anne of a Thousand Days. They snuck her into the ensemble cast of the disaster-crazed cash-in Earthquake. Then Brian De Palma used her as a Hitchcock-style ingenue in his film Obsession in 1976, where she convincingly straddles the line between childlike innocence and a sultry remoteness that is very adult, reminiscent of Kim Novak in Vertigo. Yet there's this fierce intelligence in her eyes that separates her from the unattainable vessels of desire in Hitchcock's films. In this movie, she brings a very similar energy. Small, petite, frail. She's convincing when in danger, but her eyes convey an anger and a dissatisfaction that drives her to break the system. Interestingly enough, in the novel, Catherine is written as a tall, beautiful blonde with a mountain of sex appeal. Bujold is beautiful, of course, but doesn't fit that bill exactly. It's an interesting casting choice because when I read the book, I imagined that the character, though female, may have resonated with Crichton. In the novel, Catherine is revealed to be a true lover of books and reading, who took up the medical trade as a practical move, much like Crichton. Her height is also an object of insecurity with her character, as it was with Crichton, who described himself as an outcast in his youth, burdened by his massive size. He was 6'9", gangly and thin.
I was really uncomfortable. I was the tallest person in the world, as far as I could tell. Older kids chased me home and beat me up. I don't think there's any question that I did have a kind of withdrawal.
In the novel, Catherine's struggle thematically parallels Cook's investigation of sexism and the very topical dilemma of women integrating themselves into the workplace post-women's lib. Crichton's film doesn't lay this element on too thick, and eschews many examples in the book of Catherine warding off demeaning comments or patronizing expectations of her ability. Though we do get a poignant introductory scene of Catherine and her boyfriend, the up-and-comer Michael Douglas, as they have a very relatable argument regarding the predicament couples find themselves in regarding the maintenance of a home when both lovers work.
Honey, I'm gonna take a shower. Can you grab me a beer before you start dinner?
Hey, Mark, get your own beer.
Oh, honey, for Christ's sakes, come on.
I want to take a shower.
Douglas's character of Mark obviously admires Catherine and respects her job, but still expects or is aggravated by the vacant space in their relationship for wifely devotion, which he feels is lacking. He lacks the paternal leverage of breadwinner to expect a cold beer after a long day when his partner is working too.
I don't see why you can't share half the responsibility.
I share more than half the responsibility.
No need to shout.
Then what are you running off for? You think I want this? Look, let me tell you something, Dr. Wheeler. I make my share of concessions for this so-called relationship.
I know it's hard.
I also want you to...
politically.
Another progressive element of the movie is the choice of the first anesthesia victim, Lois Childs as Nancy, Catherine's best friend. Her character approximation in the book dies by anesthesia after a routine surgery to stop vaginal bleeding. It's a very tawdry and gruesome moment, here switched by Crichton to an abortion procedure, which is obviously the less commercial choice. Perhaps its inclusion is a feminist one, to normalize the idea of abortion. There are a few characters who have their misgivings about it.
Actually, it's a TAB. That's a therapeutic abortion, fellas. So let's keep it clean. It's a married patient.
But when it comes to the heart-to-heart scene between Nancy and Catherine, It's discussed in a more matter-of-fact and understanding way.
It'll be fine, Nancy. It's routine procedure.
Or its inclusion could be a subconsciously anti-feminist one, in the way we would see teenage drinking and fornicating portrayed in the coming slasher films of the era. Despite the protestations of Deborah Hill and John Carpenter, it's a true coincidence, then, that every sexually active teen in their film Halloween is cut down save the virginal Jamie Lee Curtis, as it would follow in subsequent slasher films. Could we interpret Nancy's death during an abortion as a similar kind of thematic punishment?
Oh my God.
Either way, her death affects Catherine very strongly. Citing the data regarding minimal risk of anesthesia comes off as technocratic and cold, and not comforting at all.
The risk of surgical anesthesia is 6 per 100,000. Now, in a hospital this size, 10 patients in a year is not surprising.
The unexpected anesthesia deaths come fast and furiously. Even the healthy and barrel-chested Tom Selleck, in a small early role, succumbs. Everyone but Catherine shrugs their shoulders, cites the statistics, and carries on with the business of medicine.
Twice in 2 days, it's not normal.
Susan, in certain cases, patients
I know,
are always...
you told me all that. 2 in 2 days.
Crichton published a nonfiction book called 5 Patients in 1970, where he followed the process of caring for individuals at Boston General Hospital in the late 1960s. He used the book as a platform to discuss hypothetical changes in the medical field, possible future technologies, as well as the failure of the medical system and the way it trains personnel to relate to their patients. Crichton saw that with the overemphasis on the scientific approach, the doctors began to think of themselves more as technicians working on a machine than as a human being caring for somebody sick. He also made a point when interviewed by the New York Times about the book to impugn the American Medical Association, which he claimed had worked to the detriment of the patient in nearly every way imaginable, and that an enormous number of young physicians can't speak out because they face the prospect of getting a license to practice and consequently don't dare cross the AMA. This is an animating concern of Coma, the inability for a young and inexperienced doctor to follow a troubling lead without fear of retaliation, professional and otherwise.
You're looking for truth and justice, huh?
I'm looking for fairness.
Well, in fairness, Susan, you've challenged the professional competence of a chief of service at this hospital, and he didn't take it well. No reason why he should.
Now in Coma, Catherine is obviously dealing with a far-fetched sort of murder cabal that is willing to wipe out bystanders in its pursuit of concealing the truth. But in a more grounded way, she is filibustered at every turn by institutional barriers, being barred from access to information, belittled by senior doctors for whom admitting fault is akin to professional suicide.
These cases share nothing in common except they all emerged with unexplained coma. We're certainly not neglecting that problem.
I didn't say you were. Do you mind if I just have a look at them?
I'm afraid I do mind.
Crichton carried this spirit of rebellion against the polite consensus throughout his entire career. He often went out on a limb with his observations and earned the ire of many professionals and experts for doing so.
The problem is especially acute with scientific decisions because the issues are complex and the policymakers are not usually trained in science. In addition, the staffs feeding policymakers often give them deliberately biased information in an effort to make a partisan case.
He was also a fairly outspoken critic of doomsday prognosticators on global warming, for which he took many slings and arrows, but never relented.
What I said in my book, and I defy anybody to tell me I'm wrong, is I said nobody knows how fast it's going to get warmer, and nobody knows for sure what the various contributions of warming are. And I've predicted 0.8 of a degree, and nobody knows that I'm wrong. That in general, Hollywood is like most of the rest of the country, which is that in terms of the environment, they have an attitude, but they don't have any information.
The way the doctors in Coma rally around each other to shield themselves from criticism and protect their institution is something we should all be very familiar with today because we saw it play out during COVID-19. We've seen prominent doctors in celebrated positions at Ivy League universities shunned, mocked, and belittled when they dared stand up to officialdom. We can hope they will be vindicated, but unlike in the movies, it's not very often we see the lid blown off of a conspiracy in any kind of satisfying way. Even when the evidence is found by Catherine during her death-defying climb of a carbon monoxide line hooked up to OR8.
They're killing people with carbon monoxide in OR8. They have a radio thing. Turn the valve.
Her concerns still fall on deaf ears.
I can manage that. I'll keep
keep her here. All right, look, I better go.
Catherine's concerns lead her to a mysterious institution where coma patients are ostensibly being cared for. We see a spectacular science fiction image of various nude bodies hung up from wire in a large spacious room, lit with a mysterious purple light, recreating the image from the cover of Cook's novel, striking and indelible, that no doubt contributed to its hundreds of thousands of copies sold. The building standing in for the mysterious Jefferson Institute was a former headquarters for Xerox Corporation, and the sequence of Catherine's clandestine investigation really puts the movie over the top for me. I love this location. The brutalist architecture is at once appealing and interesting, while also conveying something stark, fortified, inhuman, and massive that parallels the theme of institutional power against the lowly individual, while concealing a secret from the outside world. The secret? The Jefferson Institute is a facade, merely a show, a scientific charade as a front to sell the organs of their victims.
We have a left kidney, 2 hours old, ready to ship. It's a 4367, a 31-year-old male. The bidding now stands at 42.5.
It's even kind of a charade within a charade, as the coma patient is taken from their wire contraption when visitors arrive, because the public simply can't handle the truth in the minds of the medical professionals who run the organization.
We found it is inadvisable for relatives to know the actual circumstances of patient care. It's just too much of a shock. So we bring the patient here. After the relatives visit, we return them to the main care facility.
The classic things that most annoys me is the idea that patients ought not to know what's going on. Keep them quiet and happy and, nice childlike patients. It's, I think, no longer a justifiable kind of position to take, and as we start to restructure healthcare in this country, a large part of the restructuring has to be in terms of what patients want. And patients are not going to be in a position to determine what they want unless they know something about what can be had.
This ethos is cemented when Catherine confronts Richard Widmark's George Harris at the film's conclusion.
Cheers.
Subdued and under the effects of a sleep-inducing cocktail, the mild-mannered head of the hospital monologues to Catherine about the importance of narrative control for the feckless public.
But our society faces momentous decisions. Decisions about the right to die, about abortion, about terminal illness, prolonged coma, transplantation, decisions about life and death. But society isn't deciding. Congress isn't deciding. The courts aren't deciding. Religion isn't deciding. Why? Because society's leaving it up to us, the experts, the doctors.
He even refers to medicine as a quasi-religious institution. This, no doubt, resonated with audiences of the late 70s from the perspective of government secrecy and lack of institutional faith post-Watergate in Vietnam, but I think the biting inclusion of the word expert hits with more strength after having been browbeaten by the term repeated ad nauseum all during COVID. All critical thinking was to be outsourced to those with this impressive moniker, and any resistance was met with massive social derision, ostracism, and even the loss of one's employment in some cases. Ultimately, Mark does come through for Catherine, performing the masculine duty of rescue from certain death, but only through her work to break down the barriers in his head does he come to the conclusion of doing the least he can do. Man and woman are united in their defeat of an evil system that came between them. Her by using her intellect and cunning devotion, him through brawn and bravery. Coma is a really great movie and arguably Crichton's best film. I think there could be a debate over whether or not something like The Great Train Robbery is more of an audience pleaser. And we talked about Genevieve Bujold's having to crawl over scaffolding and up and through like pipes and small areas throughout this film, but it's nothing compared to what Crichton puts Connery through, nearly Buster Keaton-style antics at the climax of The Great Train Robbery, which is a great movie. But I think this film is more relevant in discussions of Crichton and his personal attitudes and his persona that he presented to the world as someone who took a great interest in popular science. He was really sort of a spokesperson for the scientific community, whether sanctioned or not, but due to his credentials and popularity with the public, he found himself with a fairly powerful voice to speak on these issues. His controversial opinions and his willingness to speak openly about them, I think Coma is the film that's more salient in discussions of his legacy. It's also quite a marked improvement over maybe the more stilted film Pursuit, his original television film. Don't sleep on some of his other movies, though, which I didn't get a chance to talk about. Runaway is a fun action science fiction film. Tom Selleck delivers a great star performance. And Looker is completely underrated. I would really encourage you to check out his film Looker, which deals with the idea of Hollywood phoniness, plastic surgery, body image, feminism, how the body can be manipulated through technology and commoditized. Quite literally, as women in that film are scanned into computers and their likeness is used in perpetuity forever, and then they're murdered by the evil cabal. There's also some great Albert Finney action sequences in which there's a gun that stops time and causes people to have like delayed reactions. So it's just kind of it's a really great idea for a fight. Cinematically, though, it doesn't exactly work, but it's still very memorable. Coma is a great movie. Thank you guys for sticking with me through this review. If you like my work and want to support what I do, consider donating on Patreon. And stay tuned for my next review, which will be David Cronenberg's Videodrome. I'm really excited to share that with you guys. And check out the live stream I did with Ryan Cinecrisis on Psycho, and we're going to have a new one coming your way, recapping the later half of the summer films. We're going to talk about The Bike Riders, Wolverine and Deadpool, Twisters, and Alien Romulus. I'll see you then. Thanks.